We learned last week something that we belong to God. We belong to God. That's kind of foundational, right? God loves us so much that He gives us Jesus Christ, His one and only Son, and we belong to Him. And He will go to great lengths to make that known to us. Here's foundational point number 2. We belong to God, and we belong to who else? Take a look around. Take a look around for a minute. You belong to each other. We belong to one another. God doesn't create us, make us, give us all of this beautiful creation and say, okay, it's all yours, all by yourself. Enjoy it. No. From the very beginning, God gave us one another. He gives us each other. You know, that primary relationship is that marriage relationship between a man and a woman. God gives us that relationship to sustain and to grow a family and to build a family. God gives us other people too. He gives us friends. He gives us loved ones, extended family. He gives us the church, a congregation where we can grow together. So all that is to say, we belong to each other. We belong to one another. That's one of our foundational claims. We belong to God and we belong to each other. I met Scott Perkey in the second semester of 8th grade. Now, I'm from Nashville, from West Nashville, and Scott came from Memphis. He transferred to our school from Memphis. And, you know, if you grew up here, you know that people from Memphis are just a little bit different than people from Nashville. And Scott fit the bill right off the bat. He came in and he said things like, dude, that's so awesome. He wore a really big Poison shirt, rock band, you know, and it was one of those you really weren't supposed to wear at school. I think he got in trouble for it. They're like, yeah, you can't wear that here. You're going to have to go home, take that off, change it around. But he would wear these kinds of shirts, Guns N' Roses and Poison. And he even signed his last name P with that Perky, with that Poison P. He just was a different person, you know. And I love this guy. I loved the fact that he was different. We became friends almost immediately. We did everything we could together. We ate lunch together. We hung out after school together. We listened to music together. We just became friends. And within a couple of years, Scott Perkey and I became best friends. Many, many important parts of my life have been with Scott Perkey, filled with his presence. It just became one of those things. And people who knew us after a period of time said, yeah, they belong together. It's just as one goes, so does the other. That's just the way life is. And I think that was a gift. See, God gives us those kinds of people in our lives. It's a blessing. It's a gift. We all have people that we can think about that compliment us in a certain way like that give us something that we really couldn't have without. If we're fortunate in life, we'll have one or two people that we can always be able to call on and have them and desire to be in their lives. In Luke's 15th chapter, there are 3 parables that Jesus gives. And we've talked about these parables many times. 3 parables: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And all 3 have a common theme. You know, the lost sheep is about 100 sheep, and 99 of them are okay, but one of them gets lost and gets away. And so the shepherd goes. He leaves the 99 and he goes to find the lost sheep to bring him back to the fold. The lost coin, we talked about that actually a few weeks ago. A woman has 10 coins and she loses one and she rips her house apart. And she searches all night, whatever it takes, to find the lost coin. And the lost son is about a father who had 2 sons. And really the parable should be called Lost Sons, which is the title of this message, because both of them end up lost. One of them wants to leave, and he actually physically becomes removed, but the other one stays home and becomes angry and bitter and lost. All 3 of these parables that Jesus told have a common theme. And that common theme is we belong together. We belong to each other. The one sheep that wanders off belongs with the rest of the fold. The one coin that the lady loses is so important that she'll tear the house apart and do anything she can to find it. And the one son that wanders off, the father's never going to forget about him. He might let him go, but he'll never forget about him. We belong together. We belong with each other. That's the theme of these parables. We're going to read from Luke, and I know we've got a lot to read today, but it's good to hear God speak to us. We're going to read the parable of the lost son, or the lost sons, as I refer to them. Chapter 15 of Luke, verses 11 through 32. Hear God's word. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him and ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come home,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. We got a little wind today, so just bear with me on that. Things get a little crazy. There's a lot in that parable, but it really boils down to really 3 things. 3 very important things when we understand this belonging to one another. Right off, number 1, there's this concept of division. And the parable starts out with this whole understanding of division. There's a family divided. You've got an older son and a younger son. And immediately the younger son is dissatisfied with his life in his family. And he says, "Look, I'm going to go. I want to get out of here. So everything you see that you have, I know you're going to split it up between us one day. Just go ahead and give me what's mine and I'll go. I'll be gone." Immediately there's division right off the bat. And I think that's very important for us because we understand that division, and it continues on through the story, that division is a very relevant and real part of our lives today. People whom God has made to be in community with one another, whom God has made to love one another as we are to love Him, right? Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. People have lost that ability somehow along the way. They're divided. They're divided. They're angry. They're broken. They're clashing. They argue. And it's on and on and on. You see it. It makes you weary. It makes you tired. You read social media posts and they wear you out. You watch the news and it drives you crazy. You come to church and, well, you didn't bring your Alabama tent, but anyway, you would if we had it next week, you probably would. Just kidding. Division. Throughout that parable, you see constant division, right? You see a family broken. You see a son who can't handle the life that he lives, so he gets to go live a new life. And you see how that division continues to go. And it breaks our hearts, and I think it breaks the father's heart, and it breaks the family's heart. And when you think about the experiences you have, the division that we see happening, it should break all of our hearts. And it should scare us a little bit. I see some troubling things, a lot of that happening today. It's very troubling to me to see the division. I'm a student of history, and I know what tends to happen to a nation when it becomes divided among itself, and how violent it becomes, and how dangerous it becomes, and how horrific it becomes. And we need to do our job to fix it before it's too late. As the church, as followers of Jesus Christ. And it starts with each other. If there's any division among us, it should cease immediately. If there's any disagreements among us, it's fine to disagree. Of course we should disagree, have different opinions, but we have to let love reign. We have to be willing to talk about those calmly, productively. We have to be able to exhibit that. We can do that. We can do that in our families. We can do that with our friends. We can do that in our church. And we can help our community grow. So the parable starts with division. And really then, if something's divided, what happens? You got to fix it, right? You got to figure out how to fix it. And the bulk of the parable is all about reconciliation. When things get divided, we have to put them back together. And this shouldn't surprise us about this parable, because the bulk of Jesus' ministry was about what? If you had to take a guess. About point number 2, what does it say? Oh, okay. Well, what's going on? Why isn't it up there? Reconciliation. The bulk of Jesus' ministry was about reconciliation. Look at the pages. Just go through the gospel and read it. Jesus is sent by God to reconcile us. Now, God doesn't need any reconciliation. God isn't broken. God isn't divided. God is one. God doesn't need reconciliation. We do. We are the ones who need God's intervention in our lives, in this world, which is why He goes to great lengths to provide that reconciliation, that ability for us to be reconciled. You know what a reconciliation means, right? My wife's really good at reconciling bank accounts. It's making everything even, making everything work out. You know, when things are skewed, you've got to bring them back. You've got to bring things level. And Jesus, in this parable, talks about a family broken that's got to be brought back together. It's got to be made whole. It's got to be fixed. And the first thing we've got to do is we've got to reconcile ourselves with God. But that one comes real easy in the parable. Notice how the son, when he rehearses in his mind what he's going to say after he realizes he's made the biggest mistake of his life, notice how when he goes back home, and what is he going to do? He's going to hire himself out to be a servant of his father. And the father, I think, represents God, obviously, in this parable. And he says, well, I'm not worthy to be your son, but just make me one of your servants. I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I've screwed everything up, so I'll crawl back, and I will be reconciled to you first, right? And what does the father do? He sees him way off, and what does he do? stands there and waits for him to show up and make his impassioned apology. No. He runs to him. He runs and he embraces him. And while he's still muttering out this apology and saying what his plan is, the father goes, never mind, don't worry about that. Bring the robe and put on him. Bring a ring, the family ring, and put it back on his hand. Go ahead and kill the fattened calf. It's time to celebrate. When we're reconciled, when we make that decision to be reconciled to God, it's just like that. God's been waiting for us, right? It's like the wing nut. He doesn't quit looking for it. He doesn't give up and go to the hardware store and buy a replacement. He's been waiting for us to come and say, please, Father, forgive me. Before you can even get the words off your lips, you're forgiven. He knows that. That reconciliation is so perfect. He's so willing to forgive over and over and over again. He's so willing to let you come home over and over again. Now, the reconciliation with the brother, that's going to be a little bit harder, isn't it? And that's the way it usually goes. See, it's easier with God. We have to start there. We have to start there first. We belong to Him first. First and foremost, our relationship with our Father, our Creator, dictates every relationship we will have. So if every relationship in your life is screwed up, maybe you need to look at your relationship with God first and see, is that in order? And it should be. It's very simple. It's very easy. But I know that those other relationships to men, they take a lot longer. It takes time. It's harder. That brother, he hears the party. Does he want to go in and celebrate? No. What's going on, he says. What's happening here? Well, your brother came home. You would think he'd be glad, right? He came home. Where's Bubba? He's going to run in and embrace him, right? Nope. I'm not going in there. I don't want to have anything to do with him. How can he come home and get this kind of treatment? It's not fair. It's not right. That was his brother. Relationships are messy, aren't they? Reconciliation is difficult, isn't it? But it's so necessary. It's so important. Listen to the Father plead. Listen to Him. Please. Please. Your brother, my son, your brother, he was dead and he's alive. He was lost and he's found. We've got to celebrate. We've got to celebrate. Not just me, but you and me and the whole family. We've got to be together. Reconciliation. When things get divided, we have to put them back together. And Jesus' ministry was a ministry of reconciliation. Read the gospel. See it. See Him reconciling people to God and one another over and over and over and over again. And see it happen today. And then comes the best part of it all. It's the celebration. And in this parable, like all three of them, it's the same. I said this. They all have this common theme. Something gets lost, then it gets found, and all three of them have a party. But we don't know what happens. It's left open-ended. It's Jesus. He tells it, and this is the genius of Jesus in His ability to draw us into Him and to His understanding, and He leaves it on us. There was a party, but what happened, right? Don't you want to know what happened? Did the brother ever go in? Or did he just stand there the whole time? Did the woman who lost all the coins, did her neighbors join in the party? Did the 100 sheep go back and be happy sheep together? We don't know. We don't know. We have to use our imagination, I think. But more importantly, what we have to do is we have to place it in the context of our own life. Don't we? We have to decide for ourselves. Are our lives going to reflect the reconciliation of God through Jesus Christ? Are we going to celebrate with one another the way we should? Or are we going to live stoic, angry, dissident type lives? It's an open-ended question. I read all these and I think about my relationships. I think about Scott Perky and my relationship. We went through all of these. I mean, we had our times of disagreement and division, as all good friends do. They were little arguments. I remember in high school, I remember we got in a fight once over whose car was faster. That one was pretty easy to solve. I mean, you just go out and race and see who wins. It's pretty dumb, but it was easy to solve. We got in arguments over girls. We played sports together. We fought on the football field. We'd fight on the basketball court. People would just step back and watch us. Someone would try to figure out, no, you don't understand. You're not going to be able to step between the two of them. Just let them finish it off. I got thrown out of his house once at a college party because Pastor Roger was too rowdy. Can you believe that? You can, at least in my congregation. He said, dude, you got to go, man. I said, you're going to throw me out of your own house? You're going to throw your best friend? He goes, you're right, I'm going to throw you out. Out. It was tough. But here's the thing. Over and over again, we reconciled because we were best friends. That's what you do. You just reconciled. It might take a day. It might take 10 minutes. It might take a week. Maybe longer. Probably never longer than a couple of weeks, ever. And the thing is with friends is you grow, you change. And that's part of life. And that's a good part of life. You change, you grow apart. Your life changes, you have family. But what was so great about my best friend is no matter how we changed in life, whether marriage or children or jobs or even moving away from one another, that friendship never changed. It was remarkable. Reconciliation, celebration. And we had a lot of celebrations, which is why it was so difficult for me to hear on a Saturday afternoon that my best friend had died. I listened to the phone. I was the first person they called. And I heard the words, and I just didn't believe it. How could you believe that? How could it happen? How could a 26-year-old person, healthy, happy, working, engaged, to be married, how could he die? How could it be? Was it an accident? No, he just died. I went to his funeral. I was a seminary student, so his parents asked me to lead in part of his service. His youth pastor did the eulogy part, but I did the committal prayer where they entomb him. I saw his body in the casket. I saw his parents weeping. I wrote out a prayer. How could it be? I couldn't believe it. It's been 17 years. And in some ways, I still don't believe it, as real as it is. How could I lose my best friend? The one person that probably influenced more of my life than anybody else. He introduced me to my wife. It's a crazy story. I'll tell you the story sometime, maybe not today. But he even introduced me to my wife. How does that happen? I can't explain a lot of that. I know that every one of you here can relate to that experience. Maybe not your best friend, but it could be someone else. It could be your parent. It could be your spouse. It could be a loved one. It could be maybe it was your best friend. I don't know. We've all gone through that experience, that grief, that pain. And I can say that for me, that was one of the hardest experiences of pain I've ever gone through and still go through. But I wanted to tell you, remember that this story is one of hope. And it is one of hope. And the hope is in Jesus. See, the story doesn't end in my friend's death. After he died, he and I were so close, and I went and visited his parents a couple of times afterwards. We talked, and I had dreams. I had horrible, horrible dreams about my friend. It seemed like every night. I'd have dreams where we were doing things together, and then you'd wake up and you recognize he's dead. I had dreams of his body decaying and seeing it. I had dreams of his parents weeping and me trying to comfort them. Just constant thought for about a year and a half. Just relentless. And then I had one dream, one night. And I'll never forget this. I was back in his dorm room. He went to Lipscomb, and I know it was because I'd been to his dorm room so many times. I knew it was his dorm room, and his dorm room was stacked. He had everything that he had ever owned in his life, it seemed like, in this dream, in this dorm room. This little bitty dorm room. He had his guitars, his amps, his CDs, his records, his comic books, food, anything you could think of was in this room, and it was dark. It was like a dungeon. It was dusty. It was musty. It was just so dark, so real. And I'm in this room with him, and I'm like, what's going on? How do you, what are you going to do in here? Why are you here? Why is it like this? And there was a window in this room. This is a real dream. I'll never forget this. There's a window in this room, a curtain. And I go over to the curtain and I open it. And as I open it, a light enters the room. A golden light, but a bright light. But you could see it. And it enters the room and it washes the room. Everything's gone. Everything's gone immediately. And there he stands. And he looks at me. And he smiles. And he goes, I think it's time for me to go. And he did. I've thought about him, every day, but I've never dreamed about him again. And I've never worried about him again. See, I know where my friend went. He went to heaven. God showed me. You won't be able to convince me heaven's not real, because God has shown me through God's grace that heaven is real, that it exists. I've seen the light of heaven. And I'm a very rational person. You understand that, right? But you'll never be able to convince me that that's not true. And I hope that's hope for you, because it's been hope for me. I've had other great friends in my life too. I've had loved ones that have passed away. I've had people so important to me that I care about so deeply that I've seen struggle and hurt. And I too know that we all go through that. But I have always had that hope of that dream. I've never forgotten that dream. I never will forget it. And I hope that that gives you something today and every day. Because, and I always say this when people ask me about grief and about my friend, and when he died, I knew I'd never have another friend like him. I knew the day he died, I would never have another friend like Scott Perkey. You can't replicate that. I knew, and I prayed God I'd have other friends, and I do, but I knew I would never have a friend like that again. And I've always said that my best friend's death took something that I can never get back. That's something you can never get back, but it gave me something that I would never have without it. It gave me something. God gave me something through his death that I would have never had without his death. And see, that's it. God gives, God takes, and he gives back greater than it was before. It's like that song, the Lord, he gives and takes away, right? And blessed be the name of the Lord. Why do we sing that? He gives us something, he takes it away. How can that be? He gives us something better. Better. And it's just like the parable. Your brother was dead and he's alive again. He was lost and now he's found. And see, my friends, that's why we belong to each other. So that when we get lost, we can be found. When we die, we can live again. When we have difficulties, we can be reconciled, and ultimately, we can celebrate. And I hope today we can celebrate the life that God gives us. What a gift it is. What a gift this is. The life that we have, the family that we have, the friends that we have. Celebrate. Celebrate. Celebrate.